Hello and welcome to DROIX. Today we are checking out something quite special. It is a limited edition ONEXPLAYER Mini Gundam edition, which is only available to buy in China due to licensing. As well as the amazing design, it also features the brand new Intel i7-1260P processor. How does it perform? Let's find out. As always, we start with the unboxing. The box starts the Gundam theme with gold writing and an embossed EF/SF and mobile suit artwork on top. Lifting the lid reveals an overlay with a Gundam suit head along with some text. It's a nice touch, not seen with the other ONEXPLAYER models yet. We have the ONEXPLAYER Gundam edition in all of its glory. We will take a closer look at it shortly. Underneath is a theme embossed envelope. Inside is a user guide which is in Chinese. And last but not least, we have the Gundam themed box. Inside we have a white power supply which has the EF/SF text, mobile suit number and logo printed on it. It looks really nice. And we have a red USB Type-C cable. On the connectors are the logo and suit number printed on it. The Gundam edition is based on the ONEXPLAYER Mini, and apart from the theme there are no other changes to the physical design. Taking a closer look at the theme, we can see that it has been used throughout the front. The D-pad has a blue metallic finish, and this extends to the orange and blue gaming buttons. The artwork is very fitting, with the Gundam RX-78-2 text along the side of the screen cover and the head wings of the mobile suit sticking out from it. Along the top we have those lovely looking metallic finish left and right shoulder and trigger buttons with some theming in between. And on the back amongst the fan grille is a Gundam mobile suit print. The ONEXPLAYER Mini Gundam edition features the new Intel i7-1260P processor with a massive 12 cores and 16 threads at 28 watts TDP. It uses the Intel Iris Xe graphics with 96 execution units. There's 16 gigs of LPDDR5 RAM and a choice of 512, 1 or 2 TB of M.2 NVMe storage. There's the usual Wi-Fi 6 and Bluetooth 5 for wireless communication. It is powered by a 12,450 mAh battery. In our tests, we left it running idle on the desktop for around 7 hours and for 1 hour 40 minutes under full load running Cinebench. While running Cinebenched, we measured a maximum fan noise of 61 decibels and a temperature of 46 degrees. PassMark runs a series of tests on the CPU, GPU, RAM and storage to push them to their maximum. This gives us an artificial indication of their performance under full load. At 20 watts TDP, it scores 4,719. It's a good score, in the ballpark of the ONEXPLAYER Mini 1195 G7, but not as fast as the 5800U. We will show a summary at the end of the benchmarks and compare it with the other handhelds. PCMark tests your more day-to-day tasks you may perform whilst not gaming. These range from web browsing, media consumption and working with large office documents. At 20 watts TDP, it scores 5,304. It is our highest score for an Intel-based gaming handheld at this TDP. 3DMark runs a series of tests with the CPU and GPU to see how they perform together for video related tasks such as image processing through to graphics rendering. We are testing 3DMark at 11, 20 and 35 watts TDP to see the difference in performance and to see how well it scales up over the 3 TDPs. We get a score of 1,364, 1,813 and 2,036 across the 3 TDPs. The scores are our fastest scores out of all the gaming handhelds we have tested. We are testing Forza Horizon 5 at 1280 by 800 on the default lowest graphic settings. We are also running it at 11, 20 and 35 watts TDP. We get frames per second of 44, 64 and 68. For an Intel based device, they are good scores. Compared with the 1195G7 processor, it is faster at 11 watts, slower at 20, and then again faster at 35 watts. For the Street Fighter V benchmark, we are running again at 1280x800 on the maximum graphics settings. At the end of the first match, we are getting the average frame rate. Again, we are running at 11, 20 and 35 watts TDP. At 11 watts, we get 58.82 frames per second. It's the highest in our handheld benchmarks. At 20 watts and above, it reaches the maximum 60 frames per second. We are running the Final Fantasy XIV benchmark at 1280x800 on the maximum graphic settings. At 11 watts, we get a score of 5028. At 20 watts, we get a massive 7169. And at 35 watts, we get 8008. These are the highest scores we have got in our handheld benchmarks. In our final games benchmark, we are running Shadow of the Tomb Raider at 1280x800 on the default lowest graphic settings. At 11 watts, we get 37 frames per second, at 20 watts, we get 53, and at 35 watts, we get 59. They are okay scores. They're not the highest, but certainly not the lowest. Let's have a brief look at the benchmark scores compared to other handhelds. At 11 watts, the Mini Gundam does the best on 3DMark with the highest score we have had for all of our handheld benchmarks. It is the fastest Intel based processor for Forza Horizon 5, though the AMD models are still quite far in front. It is the outright fastest on Street Fighter V and Final Fantasy XIV benchmarks. At 20 watts, the Gundam model keeps the pace going with the highest scores on 3DMark, Street Fighter V and Final Fantasy XIV. And at 35 watts, it is again the fastest on those three, 3DMark, Street Fighter and Final Fantasy. There are a few discrepancies that we have noticed, such as lower frame rates on some benchmarks when compared to the ONEXPLAYER Mini with 1195G7 processor. This may be due to some drivers or hardware differences. It could be how the TDP and processor work with some games. For example, requiring more CPU than GPU processing or vice versa. Overall, the ONEXPLAYER Mini Gundam is very impressive, with better, if not similar scores to its 1195G7 equivalent. I do think we could see some improvements on the Intel drivers for this fairly new processor, which could speed things up a little. It gives us a great indication of how the 12th generation Intel processors will perform in the future. Let's hope that it's not long before we see a new model. We are trying a few games with the handheld to see its performance at the default TDP, which is 28 watts. Don't forget, if you have an eGPU, you can connect that to the Mini for faster and higher quality graphics levels. And a quick reminder, if you have not already, please take a moment to subscribe. It helps to grow this channel and keep you up to date with new gadgets like this handheld. Everyone wins. We already know from the benchmarks that we get 64 frames per second at 20 watts. At 28 watts we can lock it to 60 FPS and get fairly stable frame rates whilst playing. With some minor changes to the graphics, you can increase one or two settings. We are getting between 30 and 40 frames per second depending on what's going on in the game. We can lock it to 30 frames per second and for the most part enjoy a stable frame rate. You will get some drops in busy scenes though. Halo Infinite is running in the mid 30 frames per second, so locking it to 30 will keep it fairly smooth. I did not have any drops below 30 on the training maps, but you may experience some on the larger maps. You will have no issues at all with the PlayStation 2 emulator PCSX2. We upscaled the internal resolution to 720p and added some filtering to make it look nice. You could actually go a little higher if you wanted to. And another that you will have no issues with is the PlayStation Portable emulator, PPSSPP. You get a rock solid 60 FPS at the default settings and everything looks fine. But you can vastly improve the visual quality with 5 times rendering resolution, and with FXAA anti-aliasing still remain at a solid 60 FPS. We are showing captured footage for the PS3, as in our initial tests we were getting speeds from 40 to 60 FPS as the shader caches were generated. However, when we went to record the actual on-camera gameplay footage a few days later, we updated the emulator and run into issues with it freezing or slowdowns. So when the emulator is working, you can get some very good performance compared to the AMD processor handhelds. On RyuJinx, there is naturally mixed performance on games due to the emulator still being work in progress. We tried a number of games and a decent number were running at full speed or at least playable frame rates. Not every game will work, it's the same for every handheld out there, but it is up there with the Iron Neo's performance. That wraps up our review of the ONEXPLAYER Mini Gundam Edition. Unfortunately, it is not licensed for sale outside China, so we're not able to sell this model at DROIX, but you can order one from the link in the description if you are interested in buying it. We hope you have enjoyed this video. If you did and would like to subscribe, that would really help us to grow this channel. Thanks for watching, and we hope to see you back in the next video.